So there's a rumor going around that was started by Film Threat that Disney has been trying to sell Star Wars for the last few months. And this video is basically, asking, is Disney selling Star Wars? And if yes, then who would buy it? Because even if you are the most diehard Star Wars fan, you cannot deny that Star Wars at this point is a damaged brand. And it really all goes back to the sequel trilogy. If you look at the sequel trilogy, whether we like to admit this or not, The Force Awakens was a beloved Star Wars movie at the time it released. Personally, I couldn't stand The Force Awakens. But, be that for what it may. Okay, The Force Awakens and Rogue One were beloved entries. And then The Rise of Skywalker came out and legitimately divided the fan base. And then and then you had the movie's director go out on Twitter and basically decry anyone who criticized The Last Jedi as a bunch of man babies, effectively stoking that flame for a solid probably year and a half. And then you get to Rise of Skywalker, and Rise of Skywalker that's the one movie that tried to appease everybody. They tried to walk back what didn't work in The Last Jedi, but then inadvertently walked back a few things that were set up in The Force Awakens. And I always said The Rise of Skywalker was the movie that tried to please everyone and ended up actually pleasing no one. Okay, there's no denying that the sequel trilogy caused irreparable damage in terms of Star Wars on the big screen. But Star Wars did have a little bit of a reprieve with Disney Plus's The Mandalorian. But even The Mandalorian brought about its own problems, because as a result of the success of the first two seasons of The Mandalorian, all of a sudden it became like Oprah Winfrey. You get a Star Wars show, you get a Star Wars show, you get a Star Wars show. Everyone gets a Star Wars show. The sheer amount of Star Wars shows for Disney Plus that were announced was mind-boggling. And the Star Wars shows that did come out to Disney Plus mostly range from either very middle of the road to complete garbage. And very famously, Tony Gilroy, the showrunner behind Andor for season 1, famously stated to IndieWire that he thought that the audience would embrace Andor first and he would have to chase the critical praise, but the opposite happened. The critics embraced Andor, but the casual Star Wars fans did not. He was chasing the audience. And the reason why the casual Star Wars fan base didn't embrace Andor at the time is because at that point in time, if you were a Star Wars fan, you had to trudge through so much crap in order to get to the good stuff that the effort to get to the good stuff simply wasn't worth it. Because if we're being honest about Mandalorian season 2, most people claim that Mandalorian season 2 didn't really start getting good until episode 4. And to put that into perspective, The Mandalorian only had 8-episode seasons. So if a season of a Star Wars TV show doesn't get good until halfway through the season, that's pretty bad. Then you had the Book of Boba Fett, which at one point turned into The Mandalorian Season 2.5. The titular character Boba Fett actually took a back seat for an entire episode. And even if you're looking at all the Star Wars projects after that, the only other one with, not only high critical praise but high audience scores was Skeleton Crew. But just like with Andor, nobody watched Skeleton Crew. By comparison, I did the video I think a couple weeks ago now that that Skeleton Crew's ratings were actually lower than The Acolyte. Skeleton Crew never cracked the top 10 of most streamed shows of the week. Unlike The Acolyte episodes 1 and 2 did crack the top 10 of Nielsen's ratings for most streamed shows the week it came out. And the coping mechanism that was used at the time for Skeleton Crew was, people are just waiting to binge the whole thing. The binge watchers are going to come in. And you might have had a point. But the binge watchers did not come in and watch Skeleton Crew because Nielsen's streaming ratings tracks the minutes watched of a show overall, not a show by the day, not like traditional TV ratings. So again, even when the eighth and final episode of Skeleton Crew season 1 came out, the binge watchers did not come along to push Star Wars Skeleton Crew into Nielsen's top 10. So again, Skeleton Crew may have been the best Star Wars show ever made, but if nobody watched it, does it really matter? And as a result of all of these Star Wars projects getting, as a result of all these mediocre Star Wars projects, it has led to a bunch of cynicism from the audience because it's not just too many of them are bad. It's you have so many announcements, and then what tends to happen is that nothing ever comes of it. Look what happened to Rogue Squadron. There was a huge announcement, Patty Jenkins' Rogue Squadron. And then within a year of the announcement, it was then reported that Rogue Squadron had been quote-unquote delayed indefinitely. Ergo, it was probably canceled, but Disney Lucasfilm didn't want to confirm it was canceled. I mean, look at all the problems that the Rey movie is going through. It's now on like its 4th writer. So typically what happens with a new Star Wars movie or show is that it gets announced and then it leads to production problem, all plays out all in the press. Then it leads to release date delay, and then you hear nothing of it anymore. What happened to Benioff and Weiss's Star Wars trilogy? The Game of Thrones guys, remember when they were going to have a Star Wars trilogy? That you haven't heard anything about that since probably 2019, 2020. Where's Rian Johnson's Star Wars trilogy? That was announced all the way back in 2017, just prior to The Last Jedi. No news has ever come out about that. Taika Waititi's Star Wars movie, I think got shelved. I think Kevin Feige's Star Wars movie got shelved, if I'm remembering correctly. See, this is the problem. You're trying to keep all this shit straight of what's been announced, what's been delayed, what's been quietly canceled. That you can't keep all this shit straight anymore. So now it leads to the fan base now adopting the mentality of, you know what? I will believe it when I see it. Okay, like the most recent announcement of Simon Kinberg. Simon Kinberg is getting a Star Wars trilogy. The Star Wars fan base, by and large, pretty much just threw their hands up and go, well, you know what? I'll believe it when I see it. Because I'm sick and tired of trying to keep track of all this stuff that gets announced, delayed, and then it never gets talked about again. And I know I've dragged out this video longer than it probably needs to go, so I'm going to end it off with this. And in my opinion, I don't think Disney is going to sell off Star Wars for one big reason. And that reason is that it would signal defeat. It would prove the naysayers correct. And if we know anything about people with egos that are so big that the known universe cannot contain them, it's that these people can never admit defeat. They don't want to come out, wave the white flag, and prove that all of the naysayers were correct about the assertion that it was that it was Disney that killed Star Wars. Again, they don't want to legitimize all of their critics. So in my opinion, no, Disney is not going to sell off Star Wars, and even if they were going to sell it, who would be willing to come in and buy it anyway with all of the damage that has been done? And not just with the sequel trilogy, but like I brought up earlier, with all of the announcements and subsequent delays and quiet cancellations, all the cynicism that has now bred Star Wars. I don't think Disney needs to sell Star Wars at all. I think what they need to do with Star Wars is that they need to effectively just put Star Wars on a good long hiatus for probably the next decade and just hope that the fan base by and large just naturally moves on from its cynicism by that point.